So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Tom Banshoff. I'm director of the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And to those of you, especially who are here for the first time, welcome to the center. I hope you have a chance to look around and have a look at some of our publications and programs. I'm especially delighted to welcome you today to a talk by an old friend and colleague, Yossi Shane, on the topic, the Israelization of Jewish identity. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that term. Israelization?
Perfect.
Okay, good. The Israeli election and beyond. Yossi is known to many, if not most of you in this room already as one of our leading scholars, not just of Israeli and Middle East politics, but also of democratization, of nationalism, of diaspora politics. He's a professor of political science at Tel Aviv University, and also a professor of government here at Georgetown, and has written some 8 books total. I'll just give you some of the titles with which you may be familiar. One, Marketing the American Creed Abroad, Diasporas in the U.S. and Their Homelands, published by Cambridge in 1999. Another on Kinship and Diasporas in International Affairs with Michigan University Press, 2007. And more recently, a book on the language of corruption and Israelis' moral climate.
Culture. Moral culture.
Moral culture, which came out in 2010 and has occasioned a debate which is still ongoing in Israel. And maybe we'll learn a little bit about that today. Yossi's current book is on the politics of archaeology in Israel. It's in development. Another controversial topic, as you can see. Yossi doesn't shy away from those. I'd like to highlight as well his contribution here at Georgetown as an institution builder. Yossi was the founding director of our program for Jewish civilization, which still thrives here on campus. We've agreed that he'll speak for maybe 35, 40 minutes. That'll give us time for more informal conversation. There's a lot to talk about, so please join me in welcoming Yossi Shane.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom, and it's really great to be here. It's remarkable. I remember when the Berkeley Initiative came out and you started to run, and now it's almost in its size and capacities and research almost parallel to the university itself. So it's a tribute to you and what you have done here, and to all of the researchers and scholars, and the productivity is really remarkable. And I'm delighted that you invited me to speak today on the topic, as I call, the Israelization of Judaism. And I will have comments on 2 subjects that are interrelated. One is the subject of Judaism in general, and why I think that the life in Israel, its culture, the society, its politics, its demography, everything that is related to Israel is becoming the most dominating impact on Judaism in general. In addition, of course, to the weakening of other attributes of Judaism in the diaspora. So this is one subject. The other subject, which was kind of complementary, is basically reflecting on the first question based on the recent elections in Israel, which just took place, as you very well know, in the end of February, or in the end of January, sorry, in the 22nd of January, sorry. And just, we have seen results which are somewhat, can give us indication to the processes that I'm talking about and their implications. So let me begin by saying that there is a very interesting case to begin with. We are at the stage when the Jewish world, which encompasses, let's say, 13.5 million, and it's a demography, you know how we count, that the first time, one can argue in history, one can say maybe, that the vast majority of Jews will reside in Israel in the short time. Right now there are more than 6 million Jews in Israel. Any way you slice it, by the year 2020, Israel will be the majority of the Jews. Not only right now its plurality, the greatest plurality, but the greatest majority. In America, for that matter, people are counting, and various counts, 5.5 million. In Israel, already 6.06, and it's growing fast. The data is so amazing because if you look at it, the the population of Israel is growing so fast. It's the fastest growing population in terms of percentage than any other democracy in the world. The fertility rate of Israel is 3.0 for women. The second one is India, 2.7. America is 1.9 now, and the Europeans are in the 1.7, 1.4, depend where. France a little bit more. But basically, Israel is 3 kids for a woman. Some people think it's only because of Arab women. No, on the contrary, there is a tremendous decline in birth in Arab women. Decline from 5.8 only 15 years ago to 3.6 or 3.5 in the last surveys that we had. Of course, in Israel it's not even. Ultra-Orthodox women are now having on average 6.5 kids, which is a lot. Zionist nationalist, or what we call religious Zionist women are 4.3, and secular women around 2.7. And there is a difference between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but these are the number. 3 kids per woman, and this will have tremendous impact on the population. This comes on the top of course, the longevity of the population of Israel, which you'll be surprised is longer than the United States. Women in Israel live 84 years old, and men in Israel live on average 80 years old. Israel, on both accounts, is one of the top 5 in terms of longevity. So this is also an interesting data to see that the population is increasing. Much of it is because prenatal care and the health system that is supporting at least longevity. I don't know if it's supporting good life or it's supporting happiness, but interesting enough, in the survey of happiness, 86% of Israelis last year indicated they're either happy or very happy. And this is without Prozac. So you can see there is something interesting is happening there. Now, what does it mean when I call it the Israelization of Israel? I would say that what is very interesting is that, first of all, for the first time you have a community of Jews that all speak Hebrew. And this is also a very interesting phenomenon, that Hebrew is now even the language, the day-to-day language of ultra-Orthodox Jews. And this is a very new phenomenon. Ultra-Orthodox Jews who used to speak Yiddish because they saw Hebrew as a kind of the Zionist language that overstepped the bound, sort of like sovereignty took over the coming of the Messiah, that they took also the language. It's the language of the students in the yeshiva, is the language of politics. I traveled the land in the last 2 years to see many yeshivas. They all speak Hebrew. And that's something phenomenal. And that's something of cultural significance. Secondly, what you see is the decline of what I call development of Judaism as a religion and as a culture in the diaspora. All the developments, or the meaningful developments in the diaspora, are Israeli related. And that's a very important point. In particular, in countries that are more with what I call traditional Jewish communities like France, Argentina, countries that they have kind of a bulk of cohesion, which also have anti-Semitism. Even anti-Semitism associated more with Israel, is the hate of Israel. The Durban Conference or attacks on Jews, many of them relate to Israel. So notwithstanding what the issue is, the Jewish issue is not anymore this traditional anti-Semitism more, as of a kind of what they call the new anti-Semitism. So even there, it is related to Israel. In France, for example, if I will give you the data, French survey, in 2002, 6% of French Jewry had kids living in Israel. In 2010, already about 10% of French Jewry had kids in Israel. 47% of other close relatives in Israel in 2002. According to our survey now in 2010, already 60% have close relatives. And 23% of more distant Israeli relative in 2002. Basically, French Jewry, and they invest in Israel, they come. But also, when you travel in France and you look at French Jewry, entire life of French Jewry, including in culture. You don't longer talk about the productivity of French Jewish culture as much as the productivity of French Jewish culture that is related to Israel. Even French literature, French Jewish literature, is now people who identify French Jewish literature with Amos Oz and Aleph Bet Yoshua sometimes. Not to say anything about Jewish food, even in this country. When you go for Jewish food and you want to be served Jewish food, you go probably get falafel and hummus. thinking that this is an Israeli genuine food, even it's a Mediterranean food, but people have like, you ask yourself when the PJC, the Program for Jewish Civilization, whenever they serve Jewish food, they serve falafel. And you don't find anymore this kind of ethnic presence. The lack of ethnic presence or the decline of ethnic presence is all across. It's across in Argentina where they speak Hebrew. You go to meeting with Jewish teachers, people who never visited Israel. I went there, 700 teachers. They all wanted me to lecture in Hebrew. They understood Hebrew. Hebrew is the language. Rabbis are coming from abroad, from Israel to the diaspora, rather than the other way around, when it used to be. So like even the ultra-Orthodox, the core of ultra-Orthodox rabbi, which used to be in New York, is now moved to Israel. Jerusalem is the hub of religiosity. I spoke to Robert Putnam because of his book, American Grace. You know, Robert Putnam has this fabulous book, American Grace, that basically try to analyze the evolution of American religion since Will Herberg's book in the 50s, and to see what really happened. And he has this whole very interesting chapter about Jewish Americans. And I said to Putnam when he visited Israel, I said, it's really remarkable. What you describe as Jews in America is nothing the way that Israelis see what Jews. You talk about ethnicity. Israelis, when they talk about Jewish, they talk about religiosity. They talk about the ultra-Orthodox, the nationalist Orthodox. They don't talk in terms of ethnicity anymore. In addition, ethnicity also has been dissipated as a trait of American Jewry or in liberal states. Ethnicity as such, unless you describe it in religiosity like in France. But when you describe it in religiosity like in France, who is in control of it? The CRIF, or the Shas party that sends rabbis, and so on. They are much more sort of like the Ashkenazi kind of like a tradition of French Jewry that used to be prevailing is no longer there. So there is a very interesting phenomena here. Now, when it comes to Israel, of course, there is always, in addition, what we call the political component, which I will not talk much about today. For a long time, as my colleague already, David Vital, wrote about it in the 1980s, if I find his quote, he talked about how Israel has become the civic religion of Jews. The civic religion of Jews, sort of like the Israeli affair has become the civic religion of Jews. They engage with Israel, either by donations to Israel or by concern to Israel's security, or if you look at the organizational design of American Jewry or any other Jews, it's Israeli-centric even when you criticize Israel, notwithstanding. I wrote this piece that called J-Date and J Street, the two pillars of American liberal Judaism. Based on sort of like after Beinart's book about the crisis of Zionism, when he said Jews in America, because of their criticism of Israel, will be forced to check Zionism at the door of their liberalism. And I asked the question, Beinart, say, but what will define their Judaism? And I said, they cannot. They cannot avoid Israel even if they criticize Israel. I go to events, a group called Betzedek and Shalom, which means justice and peace. And I go to the meeting, women who are assembling in Seattle to raise money to evacuate settlers. And I said, why are you doing this? He said, no, this is our Jewish activity. I said, if you wouldn't do that related to Israel, what else would you do? He said, we would look for all kind of circles to assemble. It's very tough to assemble without the case of Israel. And it's becoming tougher and tougher because of issues of assimilation, because of the success of Jews, especially in North America, and because of the difficulties of retaining identity. That's why when you have this amazing program called Birthright Israel, or in Israel they call it in a Hebrew word, Taglit, which is discovery, you have already 300,000 or more young American Jewish kids who come to Israel for 2 weeks as a silver bullet for regaining Jewish identity. These are completely assimilated kind of kids, or kids who have not been affiliated with any synagogues or any Jewish institution. They come to Israel, they go to the Wailing Wall, they go there, they travel their land, they meet people, they meet soldiers, they kind of become Jewish again in that respect, retaining their Jewishness. So in that respect, what you have is really a phenomena that Israel is very much hovering above the idea of Judaism and becoming kind of almost not dictating, but kind of the key component. No other issue can galvanize Jewish solidarity but Israel. No other issue. traditional Jewish organization that had debates about Jews as ethnicity, nationalism, or religion, above all, of course, the Reform Jews, let alone organizations like the American Jewish Committee, all of them are uniting about their concern for Israel, and their Judaism is very much influenced by what is happening in Israel, for good or ill. Even if they criticize what is happening, if they criticize what they consider to be the lack of liberal traditions, and therefore they will try to influence Israel to create Israel in their own image, something that forces them to come to Israel and invest. Today, the leading branches of American Jewish identity, conservative Jews and Reform Jews, have their hub in Jerusalem and their president sitting in Jerusalem, because they understand they cannot legitimate themselves here if they don't have access to Israel, because Israel is becoming so powerful. What will unite them here, or what will be the issues that will to coalesce Jewish Americans? This is a very important fact to remember. When you remember all of this, and this, of course, I have only 35 minutes, as Tom said, altogether, it's interesting to see in the end, what does it entail that the Israelization of American Jewish, or French Jewry, or of German Jews for that matter, that came from Russia. To begin with, you have to remember, the Jews are leaving many countries of domicile. The fact of the matter is that Israel has increased so significantly, 8 million people strong, with over 6 million Jews, about 1.4 million Arabs, and what they say, another 300,000 of non-identified, because these are many of them people who moved to Israel as Jews but did not pass the conversion test. But Jews are moving. Russian Jews have moved. There is no more Russian Jewry in the same manner. Argentinian Jews are not the same as they used to be. And I would say even American Jews, not because of moving to Israel, because of all the other descriptions that I gave you, in terms of their cohesion, in terms of the essence of their activity. So what does it mean in the end of the day to be Jewish according to the Israeli question? And this is a big issue. Because when you say the Israelization of Judaism, and this ripple effects on all other issues, what does it mean, Israelization? Is Israelization means the more presence of ultra-Orthodox in Israel, for example? The more presence of religious nationalists? The more presence of liberal assimilationist Jews in Israel? The very fact that Israelis only speak Hebrew? What does it mean, Israelization? This is a very good question in terms of culture, in terms of the essence of Judaism in our days. I think Judaism in our days is primarily concerned, as it has been for quite some time, with the very essence of sovereignty. The sovereignty of the Jewish people as such. And regardless of the debate about Israel's policies, about Israel's standing in the international arena, it's clear that Israel's concern, the security of the Jews to begin with, is very much related to Israel's existence. Even if there are the threats, even Ahmadinejad threats about Israel, wiping out Israel off the map. It's a direct threat on the Jewish people, undoubtedly, because the majority of the Jews reside there. Israel war have been all the time kind of like Jewish war in that respect, but much more now, Israel's security issues are paramount to Jewish security issues all around. When I was 10 years ago advising the Israel National Security Council after the Second Intifada, the eruption of the Second Intifada, I wrote a paper and I called it the Jewish Security Dilemma, predicting that once there will be the Second Intifada, it will be immediately spill over to anti-Semitic attacks abroad. Exactly how it happened. You can read it in Orbis magazine, published in 2001 and then in 2002 in International Affairs. Because it's interconnected. You cannot separate. It is not being separated, of course, by those who assess Israel. Many Israelis don't see themselves as Jewish first and foremost, but for outsiders, they see themselves as Jewish. It's interconnected. The Israeli state and Judaism is almost interconnected in their language and their attitude. In the attitude of the evangelist is interconnected. In the attitude of the Muslim is interconnected. Israel cannot see itself as divorced from religiosity as such, from Judaism. It cannot just speak about normality as a normal state, that religion is a side story. That most Israelis may feel like that, but it cannot do so. So what happened in Israeli politics to tell us about the story of the identity of the Israelization process? There are, of course, as you very well know, many of you, there are, of course, processes that are taking shape in Israel. Anyone who travels in Israel, as I did in the last few years, first of all, see a very phenomenal, a great phenomenon of cities, growing cities of ultra-Orthodox people. Beitar elite, Modi'in elite, you go to Jerusalem, you go to places, these are, you see, very, very vast population, Bet Shemesh, places that you may know or not know, but suddenly you see this incredible increase of population of ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox people with heavy presence, and the discussion is more about Judaism than it used to be on the early values of Israeli identity of the early founding fathers, which was more socialist in orientation and modernist in its approach. So Israel has become a much more, I would say, not conservative, but certainly putting Judaism at the top of the agenda. What type of Judaism? It's at the top of the agenda, including in the last elections. Anyone who looks at the last election is about to what extent the debate is we have to go back to Zionism, traditional Zionism, and this is the main two parties that kind of like surprised everybody, is what they called the Bennett party, which is the religious Zionist, and Yair Lapid, was kind of a Zionist, kind of like ardent Zionist in that respect, in the language. It's not liberalism. It's Zionism. We have to come back to Zionism with liberalism attached to it, but not to forget, first of all, who we are. We are Zionists. Going back to Zionism versus another school, which is the school of religiosity first. Religiosity first. There is a concentration in Israel, therefore, about the debate between a Zionist interpretation of Judaism, a more Zionist interpretation of Judaism, with some religiosity. Therefore, Yair Lapid, as a leader of a centrist party, will put in the second place rabbi. He will put in the in the 12th place or 11th place another rabbi. Two rabbis he will have. And Mr. Bennett, who is a religious guy and also a man who is was in the high tech, very young age, made tremendous strides, but he's also the new religious Zionist type. These are the new religious Zionists who are claiming Israel and Israelization. These are people with yarmulkes. They are joining the army. They are in the helmet the army. They are seeking to become Israelis more than the sons of the kibbutzim used to be, or at least on par with them. They are now the new pioneers, that's how they see themselves, with the new nationalist approach. And this is a very interesting combination that you have, and I would say it captures the vast majority of the Israelis. Even though politically there are only two parties that maybe together garner a quarter of the population, but they're also, if you look around, you see how many of them are in the Likud party and other parties. You can see this is the bulk of the Jewish population. Aside from that, there is the debate about what Israeli Judaism will look like by the ultra-Orthodox. And there you have a big debate. To what extent they should enter the Israeli system more and more, about what we call sharing the burden in terms of labor, in terms of studying what people call in Israel core liba, studying the Zionist liba in their studies, in terms of becoming part of the military service, which they are not. This is what it is. And this is a huge debate about shaping the Israeli society. All of these debates that came to be very much pronounced in the last elections, and with surprising results, more than any other issue, including the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is not a side story, but certainly was secondary to this development. Secondary to this development. It was not the key issue. Maybe on the left a little bit, and maybe on the extreme right on a little bit, and also extreme right party did not make it to the parliament, did not cross the threshold, and the left made nice strides with universalism as another theory. What does it tell us all about it? I think we are in a process here, a fascinating process, which will continue and become even more and more pronounced about the centrality of Israel and Israeli affair in Jewish life. It will be informing every aspect of Jewish life in terms of culture. You think about kind of like Jewish American literature of today. There is. I'm not, just, Kushner and stuff. But it's not the same kind of heaviness of Jewish American literature that it used to be. It's not Saul Bellow or Philip Roth. It's not the same kind of gravity. It's not in the same manner. It's not pronounced in this society because Jews have been so much successful in other areas in America. They can become sort of like, they may be Jewish, but it's not Jewish American literature. You don't have any more in America Jewish neighborhoods as you used to have in the 50s and 60s as described, sort of like when the Jews moved to the suburbia. You don't have the same manner, the same institutions. All of this leading us to the fact that the Jews in America, in order to establish themselves and create their identity, will be much more tied to Israel. Israel that wants to retain its leadership in the Jewish world and constantly claim on behalf of the Jews all over, including the Israeli government. The Israeli government, for the first time, is putting money into the diaspora rather than raising money from the diaspora to Israel. To retain the diaspora connected, including the Israeli diaspora. One of the very interesting things that I've been doing in this research, and I'm going again in a week time to Los Angeles, but I was in Los Angeles last month, again with Israeli Diaspora Organization. I have their pamphlet here, which is fascinating. This is the ILC, the Israeli Leadership Council members of Los Angeles. And you see Israelis who used to move out of Israel used to be regarded by the Israelis as Yordim, those like like for the Mexican, the pochos, those who deserted. Yored is someone who is stepping down. In Israel, don't talk about immigration in the natural terms. Yordim are those who are stepping down, and Olim, those who are coming to Israel, are making aliyah, kind of like stepping up in their existential being, moving to Israel. The Israelis abroad now, including Saban Forum that you hear about, they feel very natural in America, but they feel Israelis. And the Jewish organization in America don't like them so much sometimes. Say, are you Israelis or American? We are American first. But they have huge presence, huge rallies. They become, and they also no longer regard by Israel as pochos, as the Mexicans used to regard Mexicans who are coming here. But rather, as our brother, there is tremendous investment in them. They understand their skills. And because of high-tech industries that Israelis shuttle back and forth, Israel is what they call the startup nation also, they called us. In this very famous book, The Startup Nation, which kind of showed this kind of universal attitude. But this is a small kind of portion of this Zionism that I was talking about. In short, I think that the Israeli process will continue and will be even more exceeding along the lines of the challenges that Israel is facing will be reflected in the challenges that the diaspora is seeing. And the last election, I think, is also a very interesting indication of the direction it is going. There was a sense that Israel is kind of coming apart. The tribes are coming apart. There was also a sense in writing about it that Israel and the diaspora are coming apart. Because many people are very much influenced by the liberal language about it. Every time a liberal writing about we're coming apart, you think they're coming apart. But I suggest they cannot come apart. They cannot divorce. What Mr. Beinart will do about his American Jewishness if he's not going to be concerned with Israel occupation? What he's going to do? Going to go to a Reform synagogue, come back home and try to save his kids to go to a Sunday school to his kids? It's tough. And maybe find Israeli food or falafel again. It's tough. He cannot retain it. He cannot. And that's the dilemma. Even for those who have, I'm not talking about the conservative aspect of it, because in terms of travel and so on, the data that we have, who travels to Israel among Americans, mostly religious Jews are traveling, 82% have been in Israel more than once. Liberal Jews have been maybe 22%, which is kind of like showing you. So those who are attached to the conservatives. And that will mean that rather than growing apart, they will in fact grow in maybe sometime parallel, but very much will be dependent on each other. This is an interesting phenomenon that I see, that even though there is kind of like a sense that here there is a sovereign state and all others, as people was trying to describe it, Lawrence Stein, his book 2000, Homelands, it's a global world, we'll have Jews here, Jews there, but by and large it's becoming, the sovereignty is becoming much more pronounced in terms of defining Judaism rather than Judaism defining sovereignty. I know it's maybe sound provocative, but why not on such a lovely day in Washington? So I'll stop here and we'll be delighted to discuss it further because I wanted to give 35 minutes, no more.
Thank you, Yossi. You've certainly given us a lot to talk about already. I thought I'd take, though, the prerogative of the chair to ask you one follow-on question, which I'm sure would come up anyway in the conversation, relating to the sort of international implications of the trend you've identified, this Israelization of Jewish identity. We just heard that President Obama will be making his first trip to Israel. What is this trend?
He's not making Aliyah, I guess.
No, I don't think so. I haven't heard that. But what does it mean for U.S.-Israeli relations and, of course, relations between Israelis and Palestinians?
I think that, and this may sound, I think that America and Israeli relations, and I'm a student of that, you know, have going a long way. And the Jewish component is important. One should not underestimate how it is important. But there's also a very deep strategic relations there, not just because of the Jewish component. And again, I don't want to underestimate the Jewish component because people think, you know, the Jewish component is the most important one. The Jewish component in American politics is not becoming stronger. American Jews in the American electorate is only declining constantly. Declining constantly. You're talking about 5.5 million Jews. You're talking about, in the electorate, you're talking about 3 million people eligible to vote. It's 1% of the American population, maybe 2% of the American voters, I don't know. But it's not as significant. Some will say, you know, in terms of donation, it's significant. I was on the airplane reading this essay about donations to the American system. So maybe Mr. Sheldon Adelson, who donated so much money to Mr. Romney. But you cannot take this like this, you know, and Romney lost, by the way, if you don't know. But it is important, and but there's much larger component of American identification with Israel. I always tell my students about it, as I went once to the evangelical meeting to see this kind of support of Israel by those non-Christian Zionists. And I came to the meeting and I saw this huge banner in Hebrew, A'am im Agolan. The people are with the Golan Heights, you know, supporting that Israel will not give up the Golan. And I said, who are the A'am? Who are the people you're talking about? Because it's an Israeli banner, the people with the Golan. But here was only Christians. So I said we supported this, you know, ardent Christians in support. And this is only another component, but there's a much deeper sense of collaboration between America and Israel. Obviously, America always had a position about Israel and the West Bank and the peace process. The big problem for America, I think, is not the question of Judaism, is to what extent America can really move this peace process alone. I've been always doubtful. I remember when Dennis Ross wrote his book, The Missing Piece, and sort of like the, not piece, the missing part, the missing piece. And he went on the road about this, and he talked about the, what he called the misperception of the Palestinians and the misperception, the myth, he used to call it, and the myth of the Israelis and how we Americans trying to put it together. And I said, Dennis, one thing you don't write in this book. I went on the tour and was a commentator. I said, you didn't go, and this is a 1,000-page book, interesting book historically. And I say, Dennis, the only thing you don't write about is the myth of the American diplomat. When was the last time American diplomat solved anything in that respect, and how deep it was? So there is an effort, and there is a concern, and there is strategic concern, and there is affinity, and there is the democratic affinity in terms of values and so on, and the religious affinity. Our own Michael Oren wrote a very important book about this history. Now, one should not underestimate sort of like the Jewish feeling about it. And you can see how the Jews are kind of like coming en masse, if it's an AIPAC and others, and one can argue, no, they dominate the Hill and so on. But again, I think there is something much more than that. Netanyahu was not showing any sympathy to Obama, nor Obama shows sympathy to Netanyahu. But America is also interested in the Middle East. And you think about where America can really get something in the Middle East better than Israel. Leave aside all the rhetoric. You go to Cairo, you don't get much nowadays. You don't get much nowadays. You go to Syria, I don't know if it exists anymore. You're going to get it in Iran. You're going to get it in Iraq. Where do you get anything? Strategic interest. Pure and simple. You're going to get it in the Palestinian Hamas, or you're going to get it from the PA, from the Palestinian authorities. You get zilch. You get it from Hezbollah in Lebanon. I don't think you're going to get it there. Americans, they were blown apart by Hezbollah, if you remember correctly. So some people say, if you only didn't have the Jewish vote here, America would have been even-handed. What does it mean, even-handed? Could it deliver the goods? No. And so I've been more skeptical about this kind of like nexus, as if the Jewish kind of like existence here is the fact that is hammering sort of like interrupting an American involvement. On the contrary, I'll give you more provocative. I think that American involvement is much more kind of to push Israeli politics in the other side. Interesting enough. And to push them in the other side because the criticism, Alabanos and so on. This is something that, you know, I got a pamphlet this morning. Americans, friends of Peace Now. You know, in America, there's always American, because it's part and parcel of this organization. Because they want to reflect American, what they call liberal values, that they can live with themselves. I wrote in this book you're describing kinship in diasporas and international affairs. I made a distinction between people in the diaspora concerned over here in America. So the homeland is important for them, how they see themselves in this country. Like Armenians, how they see themselves in America, or over there, how they influence what is happening in the country. So Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, of course, will invest in Israel, will not invest so much in American politics, but will invest big in Israel. Liberal Jews will come and try to invest in American politics, much more than conservative Jews. You will be surprised. Much more. Even though you hear Sheldon Adelson, you think, okay, it's all about him. But the liberal Jews will also see suddenly they have to invest in Israel. Therefore, they go to birthright, to the Reform synagogues and so on, trying to impact on the school system, what they call Tali, sort of like the new religious schools in Israel for the Reform, trying to have an inroad into Israel in order to have something that substantiate their existence here.
Okay, well, thank you, Yossi. We've got a mic, and I'd ask you to raise your hand and then briefly identify yourself and pose a question. We've got about 45 minutes for discussion. Over here, Eitan.
Thanks, Professor Shane, for your really interesting talk. My name's Eitan Paul. I graduated from Georgetown last year, and I work here at the Berkley Center now. So I have two related questions. I understand how the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox populations are growing in Israel and in the U.S., and how secular Zionism in Israel is also on the rise, and in the U.S. you still see a huge part of the Jewish identity, whether through AIPAC or J Street or Peace Now, it's very important. But if you exclude the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, it seems like Judaism in Israel and America and around the world is becoming less and less religious. A growing number of people just go to Reform or conservative synagogues on the high holy days, and more Jews are leaving kind of the theistic elements of Judaism altogether. So I'm wondering, first of all, what you think the future of non-Orthodox Jewish religion will be in Israel and the United States and around the world, and also, if given that the religious part of Jewish identity in America, for example, is becoming less significant, do you think that next generation, if a lot of young Jews in my generation are moving from, their parents were AIPAC supporters, they're now J Street supporters, do you think that perhaps in the next generation they're not going to care at all, kind of like the binary thesis, and it will become less important altogether? I
will start with the religious issue because it's important. First of all, think about it, that the religious issue, as you describe it, and there were huge debates in Jewish modernity about religiosity between the Aguda, there were like several schools of thought in the 1900s. Those who were the Bund, which became a very important factor, sort of like Jewish socialists who saw it about Jews as culture. The Aguda wanted to say sort of like the exclusionary sort of Jews in the shtetl. There were the assimilationists and those who went to America, as they used to call America, the Golden Medina, the new gold, sort of the golden state of the assimilationists, and the Zionists, who were very minority in these schools of thought. The ultra-Orthodox, of course, grew in numbers, and eventually, what I describe is that while before, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s even, the ultra-Orthodox always kind of saw Israel and its struggles as something which is removed. Even after Soloveitchik wrote his very important book about Kol Dodi Dofek, sort of the fate, what he called fate and destiny, to tell the ultra-Orthodox, don't discount Zionism. We are riding the wave of God with them. Don't tell them they are kind of upstaging God's, the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah. Nowadays, there is no rejection whatsoever, I will say, among ultra-Orthodox of the State of Israel, but in the margins, which is fascinating. It used to be a huge rejection. And it was a huge rejection also by the Reform. The Reform did not want to recognize the state of Israel in 48 reluctantly. Only in 1999, the Reform movement adopted Zionism as the number one issue. I had a discussion with David Supperson in this town and with Joffe and also. They kind of came around. So Israel become the key factor for them. So religiosity, whether it was on the left, which was kind of like non-halachic Jews, what they call. Reform was non-halachic. And Orthodox was kind of considering Zionism as a blasphemy, a modernist movement that came kind of like to upstage the Messiah. All of them kind of converge and say, okay, we have to have a stick in Israel. And I described the big cities emerging of ultra-Orthodox was confident and wanted to get engaged in Israeli politics and society. Some of them are kind of like, to many of us, including myself, look weird. But they're very much powerful and mobilized and so on, and they understand how it works. And they're going to be much more pronounced in that respect. With regard to the other question, how it impacts, it varies according to countries. France has become much more religious in terms of Jews. Jews are much more mobilized in terms of the Jewish community than they used to be in the 40s, 50s, or even 60s after the pronouncement of de Gaulle that kind of created this controversy. They are now much more traditional. What we call traditional in France is Sephardic Jews. In Israel also we have traditional, and that answer to you as well. Even though many Israelis kind of shying away from synagogues and are not doing, but in Israel always what substitute the religion, what Liebman and Don Ichia called in the famous book in 1983, the civic religion. Zionism. Zionism was the substitution. We cultivate the land. We conquer the land. We have a Jewish calendar. We speak the language. We speak the language of the Bible. We speak the language of the prophets. We understand them. We don't have to wear a yarmulke and go to the synagogue for that. But even now, there is no kibbutz without a synagogue. In the old days, there was no synagogue with a kibbutz. In the army, you see a presence. If you go, and my son is here, we went to see the ending we go into the army to ending of any course in the army. You see religious Jews with the yarmulke celebrating. It wasn't like that. Everybody kind of like, there is a pronouncement of religiosity. And the youngsters are not shying away, even the Masortim, the more traditional. There is a strand of Tel Aviv, you know. It's the fascination about Israel. Israel, you know, Tel Aviv was elected as the number one destination for the gays in the world. Number one destination for gays. Kind of the city without pity. It's the city of sinners versus Jerusalem, a tale of two cities, Israel. But nevertheless, you have this all kind of like, I was 2 weeks ago, I went to the new Kabbalah Center in Dizengoff. It's a Madonna-like, but many Israelis coming to pray. There are a lot of kind of manifestation of what we call modern spirituality. People, and in the high holidays. So lots of things are happening. One thing is clear, religion is not dead. And I think as many scholars of modernity understood, this very identity that modernity is going up and religiosity is going down, it's no longer the case in understanding. Something is, people are seeking. What they're finding, but they're seeking something that because of the communal issues. And these are the development. And finally, it's about states, as you say. You cannot compare the United States even to Canada in terms of religiosity of Judaism. Canada doesn't have the same liberal streams of Judaism that America has that is divorced sort of from synagogues. You go to Montreal or to Toronto, the synagogues are packed in that respect because the community is smaller. The smaller the community, the synagogue is the hub. Even, I would tell you, a fascinating story about the 120,000 Russian Jews moving to Germany. And they moved without God, as you know. God was killed in the Soviet Union. They moved for money, whatever. How they unified? For a variety of reasons. Germany recognized, only ultra-Orthodox rabbis. Germany does not recognize Reform. And you can see in the holidays and so on, all are assembling on the synagogues. I attended with my son, was here again, Eitan. We went to the services in England with Rabbi Zaks in Marble Arch. You go in Edgewood Road from our hotel to Marble Arch. You don't see, it's the Mediterranean altogether. You see hundreds of women with burqa. This is it. This is Marble. It's all the Middle East in London. And then there is the synagogue. And Rabbi Zaks and the others, what were the sermons? About Israel. about constant sermons about British Jewry, which is being depleted also. And then I took a trip to many synagogues in England to see how it's very interesting what is left. And that's what is left. So that's an indication of that.
Over here.
Yes, hi. Well, I have two questions. My name is Barry Spergel. The first question is, in terms of Israel being the unifying force among Jews, I think one could also say that there has been another unifying force, from a sort of sociological standpoint, and that's been the Holocaust. Yes. That's a major focus for fundraising and for Jewish consciousness, especially in the U.S. And I think to some extent that's connected with a sense of guilt that the American Jewish community really didn't do. They didn't do enough to help to rescue or to save the Jews of Europe. And then the flip side of that is sort of that for that reason, the American Jewish community has a very strong responsibility to prevent the same kind of Holocaust happening in Israel because of Iran or some other force. Yeah. Also, secondly, the other question or the other comment that I had was about yeah.
This is a big issue, and it's an important one. My mind sometimes skips. This is a morning. What's the guy's name? Or the Treasury Secretary of Clinton, who wrote Imperfect Justice? The Jewish guy. No. Of Clinton's administration. It will come to me. The Holocaust is a very important issue for the collective memory and for mobilization of Jews. I will tell you, however, that it has its peak. It already reached in some ways peak, and Israel took over as well. In the last, for many years, the Holocaust in Israel was a commemorating day, but was not kind of like, it was because of the way Zionism saw the Holocaust as a failure that Zionists always warn against. And we used to say they went like a ship to the slaughter, no more. Since 76, in fact, under Rabin, Israelis started to go to Auschwitz. Israelis going to school, the high schools going to Auschwitz, they go for the tour. And that kind of moved also to the diaspora. The March of the Living is a key factor kind of in rejuvenating the memory. The memory is critical. It has been critical for Jews, as you say, in the United States. But the memory itself for the generation later on, not that it will dissipate, but will no longer be, it became what my colleague Eric Langenbacher and others call universal kind of like memory. Just as we marked Holocaust Memorial Day in the United Nations 10 days ago. It will no longer be the marker of mobilization. It is a marker there, but it's not the marker of mobilization. And even there, in terms of the Holocaust, the lessons of the Holocaust and so on are very much Israelized. So Israel, in fact, while shying away from the Holocaust as an example of not kind of like part of our memory that we have to hail, now is hailing it as more as a memory that we have to take lessons from and give tribute to. And again, I can't believe I forget his name. You should help me. The Secretary of the Treasury who wrote the book Imperfect Justice wrote a very important book. Look at your...
Hit your iPhones. Come on.
Yes, get your iPhone. Look at the book Imperfect Justice. We'll get, because I want to make a point about, it's very important because he was, of course, involved in the recovery of the money from Swiss bank. Stu Eisenstadt, thank you so much. Stu Eisenstadt, who wrote a very important book, Imperfect Justice, and showed himself, as you suggest, how I have the quotes here, I don't want to look for my notes, the second generation of American Jews to the Holocaust, are not going to sit still now when it came to my table, as our grandparents forgot during World War II, what the book, The Abandonment of the Jews. We are not, and we're going to push. And he describes how he pushed for recovering the Jewish money from the Swiss bank against Israeli government. that Israel said, you know, we have bilateral relations with Switzerland. We don't want to get into it. Even there it's tilted. Israel took upon itself. Israel took upon itself even to struggle against anti-Semitism. Don't forget that in 78, when Begin signed with Sadat, Abe Foxman came to him and he said, we have to discuss anti-Semitism in the Arab world. And Begin said, Begin was the quintessential sort of like someone who wants to bring the Holocaust back. He was not the Rabin generation of the, but rather someone who came from Poland with this kind of memories. Begin said, it will work itself out. Barak said the same during the discussion with Arafat. And Abe Foxman said, you know, you're ignoring anti-Semitism. Nowadays, Israel is putting attention to anti-Semitism after Durban. And eventually, of course, Israel created the diaspora office. Not that they give anything kind of like budget to the diaspora office, but much more kind of like taking this issue of anti-Semitism. When the minister of diaspora in Israel, Malkior, told me that he wanted to go to Durban to represent Israel on Durban is the meeting in South Africa for human rights, where it was a meeting only of bashing Israel, the only human rights issue, UN meeting. Right. And America decided not to participate as a result. But when and he said, I'm going to defend Israel against this charge of anti-Semitism and so on, Abe Foxman said, when it comes to anti-Semitism, we are in charge. It's not an Israeli issue. We are much stronger in arguing this case than the state of Israel. You deal with your own issues. But Israel it's part and parcel of Israel's policy now. Everything is there in terms of the ministries, the education system. You cannot ignore it because it's so much all-encompassing in terms of the Jewish world, as I described. And I think it is also with the Holocaust that it will be much more kind of like the way Israel will conduct its affair vis-a-vis the Holocaust. That will, because the Wiesenthal is not going to be here, and all those generations of survivors who were in the diaspora, or even the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which is kind of an American already place, or in other places. But Israel will try, by nature. It's only in Israel when you have a Holocaust Memorial Day that every single kid is standing for the siren, for the full day. That you have a whole day shut down the television to have this memory being kind of like part and parcel of your existence. In America, of course, you can have this memory, but it's glimpse. It's not something that will be kind of so much present. It's part of what you call the national calendar. Including, of course, what Israel made as a civic religion, Israel's Independence Day, which is the most perhaps important day. And the ultra-Orthodox used to rip their clothes, some of them still do, kind of like in mourning, wow, this state was created. Nowadays, you know, clothes maybe cost too much, they don't rip them anymore as much. Maybe, I don't know, I didn't check it, I don't have any empirical data about it. Yeah.
Jocelyn? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn Cesari, I am a fellow here. And you're absolutely right. It's more a comment than a question as such about the magnet of Israel as the most important form today to redefine Jewish identity. But I would like also to bring the others. It's not only one way. What I see also is the influence of Jews, maybe more in the US than in Europe, about the religious life, the cultural life in Israel itself. For example, the whole debate about the reforms and the conservative, and the fact that for a long time there was a resistance of this Orthodox establishment to recognize the conversion. And now you can see that there is this diversity happening, and this comes from outside, not the other way. And you mentioned the French Jews that I know pretty well. I mean, if you look at the way that French Jews settle in Israel, they maintain also some kind of cultural life. You go to Netanya, it's a French quarter, you know. So I would say it's not only one way, it's two ways. And it's also creating continuous relationship. It's not either or, I think, in this sense that the circulation, the mobility of ideas and people are both ways. So yes, in terms of the importance of Israel on redefining Jewish identity, but I would say also about influence from outside on redefining the religious landscape or cultural landscape in Israel.
I will only say I agree. I've written extensively on this exact subject, as you know, in the 1990s. I had the whole thing about the influence of the American liberal streams on Israel religiosity, but I will kind of like deal with what I have dealt with. The big lack of liberal streams in America to this issue has been that they did not put, they have challenged, they have taught Israelis how to challenge these issues in the Israeli courts. And they have been part and parcel of the challenge, the legal challenge to the ultra-Orthodox and the Orthodoxy in Israel. But it's not enough in Israel to challenge in the courts. The courts are becoming kind of like, the court's decision on who is a Jew is becoming, people are kind of like, they want legs, they want bodies. And that was kind of like forcing them, you come here and you influence. And that is what is happening, even in the debate right now, which is increasing on the issue of conversion. This party, Abait HaYehudi, the Jewish house of Bennett, which is coming from kind of like a religious Zionist, but who serve in the army, who also are modernist in their approach, as I said, high tech. They come with this vision. You're not going to take over the ultra-Orthodox over these issues of religiosity. We are bringing back Zionism into the fold in terms of appointing rabbis, in terms of religion and women, in all of these issues that people went to the extremes in terms of Israel, because the ultra-Orthodox really put kind of like a dent on Israel religiosity in terms of almost, I would say, hijacking religiosity, as Yosef Dan wrote. Yosef Dan wrote that for many years Israelis shy away from religiosity because the ultra-Orthodox hijacked it. What I see in this election is a fascinating phenomena. It's this kind of like trends that are in Israel. We're going to reconquer it now. And with a combination of the religious Zionists, who of course have an issue also with the settlements and so on, but with the centrist Zionists as Lapid. And I've been privy to some of the discussion to see how we conquer these issues again, to take it away from the hands of those for a variety of other reasons, of the labor market and so on. In terms of the mutual influences, of course, French Jewry come and they bring with them a lot of things. And as you say, Natanya, I have a whole thing about French Jewry here, and I've been assisted, I must say, in the French case with one of our own, Sarah Feinberg, who is teaching here, also a French Jewish scholar who teaches at Georgetown. And I go to the Sciences Po once a year. We try to do some work there. But at the same time, it is not that it's kind of like reciprocal. Of course, there's always reciprocal. But there's only one trend. The trend is toward Israelization, not the other way around. And this is just from 2 days ago, Bibi. This is Bibi. If you don't know who is Bibi, the former king of Israel. As in Time Magazine defined him as king, and suddenly, as you know, like all kings, you lose eventually your throne. So it's still controlled, but this is how we will stop assimilation in the diaspora. So we have to put more money, and it pledges $2 billion Israel will put. I don't know how much money Israel have left after the last economic crisis, but nevertheless, the rhetoric is there that we have to put money over there, and it's not a question of you put money over here. And I think reciprocal relations, yes, but it's only in one direction because of demography, including in the French case.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Elijah. I'm a freshman here at Georgetown. And you mentioned earlier birthright, and I've been to Israel a bunch. I lived there for 6 months, and I've gone on some programs similar to birthright, never birthright, but some with my school, Keshet, this Red One for Israel one. And my question to you is, what do you think, what you call it, like the Israelization of Jews, how has that affected kind of the thought processes surrounding Jewish presence in the West Bank, with specific regards to how programs like Birthright or Keshet or these other ones that are bringing American Jewish teenagers to Israel for often the first time, kind of what their role is in kind of portraying what type of Jewish presence should or should not be in the West Bank?
It's a very good question. You know, there is a big debate going on, and I didn't dwell much about it, but a big debate going on about what Israel will look like. So what Israel means in the end of the day? Is Israel means someone who is controlling the West Bank and the Palestinians do not get rights? Is that what it means? There is a discussion there. Can Israel incorporate the Palestinians as part of the nation and the national community? Of course, 1.5 million Arabs are already part of the national community, but in a different fashion. They're citizens of the state, equal rights supposed to have, but they're not part of the nation because the nation is Jewish nation in that respect. So there is a big debate what the nation should look like, the terminology of the nation. With regard to American Jews, there is a kind of like people trying to capture hearts. There are those who, of course, trying to bring Jews into the West Bank and so on other places, to them, attachment to the old patrimony of the Jews in Hebron and other places. And there are those who see it as a way of what I would say kind of like hijacking nationalist Judaism, hijacking the liberal Judaism and debating that. These are two different schools of thought. The conservative and the nationalists are always much stronger. And the reason is that the liberals are amorphous. Liberals are always amorphous by nature. Liberals do not coalesce unless there is something tremendous. They are individuals. They don't see community as the rest, as the traditionalists and the religious. They do not. They also do not have role models as such. In Israel, you have like a combination of a fascinating phenomena when the Israeli liberal streams have lost role models, including in politics. Maybe they're regaining them again. The old role models used to be the founding fathers in Israel. Later on, the military leaders. When I grew up, we had military leaders, kind of like pictures for Yom Ha'atzmaut, for Independence Day. You used to have kind of like, you knew who are the people, the ideologues. But liberals in the liberal market do not have role models anymore. Religious always have role models and have people, they listen to rabbis. And that's something that is kind of like part and parcel of this debate. Who is able to coalesce communities? Who is able to coalesce communities? And that is a huge issue for the question of Judaism, because Judaism is still a kinship tie issue. The fact of the matter is that Israel's sovereignty is constantly in peril, or issues of war and peace kind of creating the us versus them factor so much as a strong factor is very much also allowing this debate to take place and to shape. And then, of course, as I said, there is also commonalities. It's a small country in terms of geography. People speak Hebrew. The proximities are such, and the threats are such, or the risks, or so on. So you have Israelis are constantly seeking other Israelis, as much as they cannot stand each other, Israelis. But whenever they go abroad, they will look where are Israelis. They will go to India. They will go to Goa. They will look for Israelis. I come back from. I was in India a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and I come back in the Israeli airplane, and I sit next to me sitting this Israeli young guy, curly hair with a guitar, coming from Goa. Goa, that's where Israelis are going after the army to get stoned and sort of like. But in the middle of the airplane, there were like 150 or so Jews coming from India, called the Lost Tribe of Menashe, sitting quietly in the airplane. Like I didn't know who they were, and they were sitting there. And as the airplane landed, the elderly, so like in the middle of all of these people, the Lost Tribe of Menashe, people are saying, are they Jews or not Jews? Kind of Indian people coming to move to Israel, making Aliyah. He stood up and said, "Hallelujah, hallelujah." And the guy next to me with the guitar, with the curly hair, whose parents probably said hallelujah just 50 years ago or 25 years ago, said, "Look at the suckers, they don't know where they come to." And I look at it, it says, and he already served in the army and went to go. And as the door opened from the airplane, to the how do you call it, not to tarmac, even to the there was the guy from Keren Aididut, what's his name, Rabbi Eckstein, an American rabbi who created the friendship fund, which is Christians supporting Israel, waiting for them at the door, welcoming the Lost Tribe of Menashe. And I said, look at this picture. And you have such pictures just to understand the logic of them. Those come with tremendous passion, memories that were lost and maybe recovered. And those are already in the airplanes coming after being stoned, forgetting everything. and this is how it is. It's kind of this kind of combination of modernity, post-modernity, and antiquity that maybe never existed. This is the dynamic, very colorful.
Could I just ask a quick follow-up relating to relations with the Palestinians.
Yes.
You alluded to this yourself. What are really the implications for your thesis, if any, for discussion of scenarios, one-state solution, two-state solution, and so on?
First of all, this is lots of discussion, but one of the things that I was recently invited to Bakka al-Garbiya, which is one of the largest kind of like semblance of Arab Israelis. I'm not talking about the West Bank, who are Arab Israelis who, of course, wrestling with their own identity. They're not Jewish Israelis, but they're Israelis, and where their place is. And we had a very big discussion because of the so-called Arab Spring. How do they see it? Or in light of what's going on in Syria and Egypt, how do they see themselves? So first of all, there is kind of like a tremendous desire among Arab Israelis, I'm not talking yet about Palestinians in the territories, to be part and parcel of the Israeli state. So we understand it's a Jewish state, they said to you, but we want to be part of it. How are we incorporated given the fact that we cannot be Jewish? This is an issue that never goes away. How are we incorporated into this state that we are inside the nation, inside the state but outside the nation, while people who are outside the state are inside the nation? This is a conundrum. But there is a tremendous desire to be there. Should they serve in the army? Because, kinship ties are not only about blood shared, but also about bloodshed, as I wrote about it. So when you have Druze in Israel who serve in the army and die for Israel, they're being buried with the Israeli flag, with all the honors are kind of like much more accepted in the Israeli state, even though there are Arabs in there. So there will be a big issue that will continue to be with the minorities. And with the Palestinians, of course, this is exacerbated even further, because if the Palestinians in the West Bank are not part of the Israeli state as citizens, of course not part of the Jewish state, what are they? Can they be without any rights? Is Israel becoming a state that will not grant rights and will take the land? This will be inconceivable for Israelis, not regardless of what some people will say that this should be. But obviously this will have to be solved. How to solve the political issue remains a big issue. Is it solvable? How you solve it? Unilateral, bilateral? Do you move with Abu Mazen? This is a huge issue that as I alluded to, I wish I knew how to do it. I think Israeli, and today I wrote, anyone who opens today's newspaper in Israel, which I'm sure you all will go do after that, I wrote a whole thing about it. What would be the first steps that the government should do as a result of what I think should be the first few steps about negotiations right now, immediately. I think they should be giving up certain territories immediately, creating a Palestinian state immediately, declaring East Jerusalem and the settlers, like in some areas as part and parcel of Israel, exchanging territory. We're doing it very quickly now. How to do it in terms of security, there are many questions, and my ideas are as good as many others about it, and even worse than that, I guess. Yes, there is a guy there, you promised it, yes.
Yes, sir. My name is Kami Bhatt, and I'm with the Pakistani Spectator. And my question is, do you see any clash of civilization the way you are describing the Israeli, that they are becoming little more traditional, little more religious? And I could say the same thing about Muslim American community, that the people who really lead community or who are kind of so-called leader or politician, even they are in very small minorities, but if you study their lives, how they live their lives, they live their life exactly the way Osama bin Laden kind of people live in Muslim country. They don't drink, they don't smoke, they don't date, but majority of the Muslim drink in this country, they date. They don't eat pork, of course, 99% don't eat, because there is really no pleasure in eating pork. So they observe Islam there. But in terms of other things, where they have little bit fun, they don't care about Islam. But the people who lead Muslim, who go to the White House or in Pentagon here and there, they are very, very strict practicing Muslim. But they disguise their inner feeling that attach them or give them very strong sense of Muslim identity. They don't make it public. So, and these are the people who are influence U.S. foreign policy toward Muslim countries. So because of these people's disproportionate larger influence on U.S. Muslim population, and then this introvert Jewish identity, or then, you have these fundamental Christian who want to convert everybody into Christian before Jesus come, and Muslim, they want to convert everyone into Muslim before their Mahdi come. I don't know if Jews want to do the same thing, but these Muslim the practicing Muslim and practicing of evangelical Christian, they are completely ready for this clash of civilization thing. Thanks.
I just will go to your premise. I didn't say that in this country, or for that matter, I will tell you in Israel in that matter, and I will say what I just will declare, it is the move to tradition. There has been, but not in this country. Jews in this country are not more tradition. In fact, the more traditional Jews and the more Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox are moving to Israel. Or if not moving to Israel, even though we got the data, which was 2 months ago, that the only Jewish community, if you turn again to your iPhone, you see the only community growing now, it's in New York, is because of the ultra-Orthodox. But they know how to grow. They grow fast. So they're growing. But again, in terms of the impact on the culture of Judaism in America, in terms of the impact on the culture of Judaism in America and the involvement in politics, it's not the more traditional that are taking the lead. It is the concern for Israel. You have conservative voice maybe with the Republican, but by and large, you know how Jews vote. Jews don't vote for the Republican, they vote for the Democrats in the end of the day. The vast majority of them. In terms of Israel, what was surprising about this last election, I don't know if surprising, that those who counted the votes eventually saw that the center garnered more than the right for the first time. For the first time not, but after the last election, it was different. That the Israelis, and I said where the combinations are, because both religious Zionists understand that if they stick to religiosity, they have to be stuck with the ultra-Orthodox, which they don't like. Don't forget that Rabbi Ovadia, the chief rabbi, the former chief rabbi, and the leading rabbi of Shas, the sort of the Mizrahi ultra-Orthodox, called Mr. Bennett and the Bayit Judaism as people who are blasphemous. Anyone who votes for this guy is voting against Judaism. And now they're going to come to haunt him. They say, you want to sit with us in coalition? You told us we're not Jewish? Okay, we're not. We're going to sit with others. We're going to sit with Mr. Lapid. Zionism is coming back in that respect. They understand. And the centrists were not traditionalists, but they're kind of saying, okay, liberalism in itself is not sufficient for us to make a point in the community and to make a point even on foreign policy. We have to coalesce around what values do we coalesce. Zionism. What kind of Zionism we want? We want Zionism that solves the issue with the Palestinians. We want to reiterate our commitment to cherish values of Ben Gurion. What do we want to do here? And that's the discussion that is going on. And if you look at Lapid's party, which is interesting, even though it was assembled like, last minute, many people who came to be members of a Knesset didn't know even they were on the list. There was kind of an avalanche. Suddenly they became members of it. But you see, there is this woman, Calderon, who runs this seminar on New Judaism. There were like 2 rabbis. There were those who kind of like talking about Zionism in the classroom more. And it's interesting. This is the tenor. It's not a secularist liberal tenor. And there were those on the left still talking about the Palestinian issue and so on. Everybody talking about it. But this is not what kind of like the big divide of the early 80s between Shimon Peres and Begin, when everybody was on the street on this issue. It's a completely different kind of like makeup right now.
I want to give someone else a chance. We'll come back if we have time. Maybe 2-3 more questions if we move quickly.
My name is John Taylor. I work for the U.S. State Department Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism. And you mentioned the term new anti-Semitism,
yes,
I think, in regard to Europe during your remarks. Can you give examples of what you consider this new type of anti-Semitism?
Sure. I mean, if you look at what's the guys, I forgot, I don't want to make any mistakes here, about the killing of the young Jewish guy in France, what was his name? Or the attack on the school in Toulouse. Or these are new manifestations of that. These are Islamists who are attacking Jewish targets. This began, of course, with the AMIA in Argentina, with Hezbollah attacking, of course, in Argentina, in attacks in Turkey, in Turks in Paris, attacks anywhere are related to this. Was Pearl. The killing of Pearl, which is kind of like my mother was Jewish, my father was Jewish, and I'm Jewish, or my grandfather. This is the key. Or the hatred of Jews in Israel in Arab countries, or the burning in Egypt. And so there is this is something that existed. How much it could be suppressed. And of course, in the language of Al-Qaeda that this gentleman was talking about. It's a key factor in the language of Al-Qaeda. And it's a key factor also in the language of Hamas. One should not underestimate how much it is. With all this kind of like Quranic verses about Jews like apes and monkeys and so on. So it's there. It's not the old kind of like Christian types of anti-Semites. I don't know where they are, but I'm sure they do exist. But they're not as visible.
Anyone else? Okay, let's have a final question back here.
Well, I was wondering about the implications of current some of the demographic trends on the identification with Israel by American Jews and other diaspora Jews. If you extend into the future the current demographic trends of the growth of the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel, they will at some point be a majority.
Yes.
And if the relatively assimilated Jews in the US and in Europe, if they read about, for example, about men and women having to sit in different parts of the bus, or like about women not being allowed to walk on the streets.
Or to sing, for that matter,
Right. Will this lead to a distancing
Huge.
of, I mean, a distancing from Israel and saying, that's not what we identify with. We're something else. And it's not Israel.
That's when it's a good question to end with. If Israel will move in this direction, this is the big debate going on, and Israel will be a darker society of people who are going into places that no one with modern aspiration want to see, undoubtedly Israel will be an alienating force to the people abroad. The numbers are not there. The manifestations sometimes are there. The way that they spit on women, what happened in Bet Shemesh, these are injuries to Israeli society that people at the center start to understand that they've kind of gave way too much, perhaps. Now, you are absolutely correct, however. If demography is the only indicator, as I wrote about it last week, the only indicator, in the long run, this is how it will be. But we have surprises with demography in the Middle East. Suddenly Arab women deliver less. Suddenly even ultra-Orthodox women deliver less. Maybe sometimes even secular people will start to have sex. Who knows? Lots of possibilities that exist. And again, migration can always come. So I would say that you're absolutely correct about this kind of trajectory. But we had this kind of like bleak projections, and suddenly 1 strong million Russian Jews came to Israel. And they brought lots of vodka and things changed. I don't know how much more vodka you can bring, but certainly there are possibilities here. Your question is very good, because if this is the trajectory, it's going to be very, very problematic to keep kind of any sense of harmony, if it really exists right now. So I will end here.
Well, Yossi, this has been wonderful. I can't recall another 90 minutes that have been so full of information and insight. It's always great to have you here. Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking Yossi once again.
Thank you. They understood Hebrew. Hebrew is the language. Rabbis are coming from abroad, from Israel to the diaspora, rather than the other way around, when it used to be. So like even the ultra-Orthodox, the core of ultra-Orthodox rabbi, which used to be in New York, is now moved to Israel. Jerusalem is the hub of religiosity. I spoke to Robert Putnam because of his book, American Grace. You know, Robert Putnam has this fabulous book, American Grace, that basically try to analyze the evolution of American religion since Will Herberg's book in the 50s, and to see what really happened. And he has this whole very interesting chapter about Jewish Americans. And I said to Putnam when he visited Israel, I said, it's really remarkable. What you describe as Jews in America is nothing the way that Israelis see what Jews. You talk about ethnicity. Israelis, when they talk about Jewish, they talk about religiosity. They talk about the ultra-Orthodox, the nationalist Orthodox. They don't talk in terms of ethnicity anymore. In addition, ethnicity also has been dissipated as a trait of American Jewry or in liberal states. Ethnicity as such, unless you describe it in religiosity like in France. But when you describe it in religiosity like in France, who is in control of it? The CRIF, or the Shas party that sends rabbis, and so on. They are much more sort of like the Ashkenazi kind of like a tradition of French Jewry that used to be prevailing is no longer there. So there is a very interesting phenomena here. Now, when it comes to Israel, of course, there is always, in addition, what we call the political component, which I will not talk much about today. For a long time, as my colleague already, David Vital, wrote about it in the 1980s, if I find his quote, he talked about how Israel has become the civic religion of Jews. The civic religion of Jews, sort of like the Israeli affair has become the civic religion of Jews. They engage with Israel, either by donations to Israel or by concern to Israel's security. Or if you look at the organizational design of American Jewry or any other Jews, it's Israeli-centric even when you criticize Israel, notwithstanding. I wrote this piece that's called J-Date and J Street, the two pillars of American liberal Judaism. Based on sort of like after Beinart's book about the crisis of Zionism. When he said, I traveled the land in the last 2 years to see many yeshivas, they all speak Hebrew. And that's something phenomenal. And that's something of cultural significance. Secondly, what you see is the decline of what I call development of Judaism as a religion and as a culture in the diaspora. All the developments or the meaningful developments in the diaspora are Israeli related. And that's a very important point. In particular, in countries that are more with what I call traditional Jewish communities like France, Argentina, countries that they have kind of a bulk of cohesion, which also have anti-Semitism. Even anti-Semitism associated more with Israel, is the hate of Israel. The Durban Conference or attacks on Jews, they're all many of them relate to Israel. So notwithstanding what the issue is, the Jewish issue is not anymore this traditional anti-Semitism more, as of a kind of what they call the new anti-Semitism. So even there, it is related to Israel. In France, for example, if I will give you the data, French survey, in 2002, 6% of French Jewry had kids living in Israel. In 2010, already about 10% of French Jewry had kids in Israel. 47% of other close relatives in Israel in 2002. According to our survey now in 2010, already 60% have close relatives. And 23% of more distant Israeli relative in 2002. Basically, French Jewry, and they invest in Israel, they come. But also, when you travel in France and you look at French Jewry, entire life of French Jewry, including in culture. You don't longer talk about the productivity of French Jewish culture as much as the productivity of French Jewish culture that is related to Israel. Even French literature, French Jewish literature, is now people who identify French Jewish literature with Amos Oz and Aleph Bet Yoshua sometimes. Not to say anything about Jewish food, even in this country. When you go for Jewish food and you want to be served Jewish food, you go probably get falafel and hummus, thinking that this is an Israeli genuine food, even it's a Mediterranean food. But people have like, you ask yourself when the PJC, the Program for Jewish Civilization, whenever they serve Jewish food, they serve falafel. And you don't find any more this kind of ethnic presence. The lack of ethnic presence or the decline of ethnic presence is all across. It's across in Argentina where they speak Hebrew. You go to meeting with Jewish teachers, people who never visited Israel. I went there, 700 teachers, they all wanted me to lecture in Hebrew. Israel is 3.0 for women. The second one is India, 2.7. America is 1.9 now, and the Europeans are in the 1.7, 1.4, depends where. France a little bit more. But basically, Israel is 3 kids for a woman. Some people think it's only because of Arab women. No, on the contrary, there is a tremendous decline in birth in Arab women. Decline from 5.8 only 15 years ago to 3.6, according or 3.5 in the last surveys that we had. Of course, in Israel, it's not even. Ultra-Orthodox women are now having on average 6.5 kids, which is a lot. Zionist nationalist, or what we call religious Zionist women are 4.3, and secular women around 2.7. And there is a difference between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but these are the number. 3 kids per woman, and this will have tremendous impact on the population. This comes on the top of course, the longevity of the population of Israel, which you'll be surprised is longer than the United States. Women in Israel live 84 years old, and men in Israel live on average 80 years old. Israel, on both accounts, is one of the top 5 in terms of longevity. So this is also an interesting data to see that the population is increasing. Much of it is because prenatal care and the health system that is supporting at least longevity. I don't know if it's supporting good life or it's supporting happiness, but interesting enough, in the survey of happiness, 86% of Israelis last year indicated they're either happy or very happy. And this is without Prozac. So you can see there is something interesting is happening there. Now, what does it mean when I call it the Israelization of Israel? I would say that what is very interesting is that, first of all, for the first time you have a community of Jews that all speak Hebrew. And this is also a very interesting phenomena, that Hebrew is now even the language, the day-to-day language of ultra-Orthodox Jews. And this is a very new phenomena. Ultra-Orthodox Jews who used to speak Yiddish because they saw Hebrew as a kind of the Zionist language that overstepped the bound, sort of like sovereignty took over the coming of the Messiah, that they took also the language. It's the language of the students in the yeshiva, is the language of politics. I remember when the Berkley Initiative came out and you started to run, and now it's almost in its size and capacities and research almost parallel to the university itself. So it's a tribute to you and what you have done here, and to all of the researchers and scholars, and the productivity is really remarkable. And I'm delighted that you invited me to speak today on the topic, as I call, the Israelization of Judaism. And I will have comments on two subjects that are interrelated. One is the subject of Judaism in general, and why I think that the life in Israel, its culture, the society, its politics, its demography, everything that is related to Israel is becoming the most dominating impact on Judaism in general. In addition, of course, to the weakening of other attributes of Judaism in the diaspora. So this is one subject. The other subject, which was kind of complementary, is basically reflecting on the first question based on the recent elections in Israel, which just took place, as you very well know, in the end of February, or in the end of January, sorry, in the 22nd of January, sorry. And just we have seen results which are somewhat can give us indication to the processes that I'm talking about and their implications. So let me begin by saying that there is a very interesting case to begin with. We are at the stage when the Jewish world, which encompasses, let's say, 13.5 million, and it's a demography, you know how we count, that the first time, one can argue in history, one can say maybe, that the vast majority of Jews will reside in Israel in the short time. Right now there are more than 6 million Jews in Israel. Any way you slice it, by the year 2020, Israel will be the majority of the Jews. Not only right now its plurality, the greatest plurality, but the greatest majority. In America, for that matter, people are counting, and various counts, 5.5 million. In Israel, already 6.06, and it's growing fast. The data is so amazing because if you look at it, the population of Israel is growing so fast. It's the fastest growing population in terms of percentage than any other democracy in the world. The fertility rate of
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Tom Banshoff. I'm director of the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And to those of you, especially you who are here for the first time, welcome to the center. I hope you have a chance to look around and have a look at some of our publications and programs. I'm especially delighted to welcome you today to a talk by an old friend and colleague, Yossi Shane, on the topic, the Israelization of Jewish identity. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that term. Israelization?
Perfect.
Okay, good. The Israeli election and beyond. Yossi is known to many, if not most of you in this room already as one of our leading scholars, not just of Israeli and Middle East politics, but also of democratization, of nationalism, of diaspora politics. He's a professor of political science at Tel Aviv University, and also a professor of government here at Georgetown, and has written some 8 books total. I'll just give you some of the titles with which you may be familiar. One, Marketing the American Creed Abroad, Diasporas in the U.S. and Their Homelands, published by Cambridge in 1999. Another on Kinship and Diasporas in International Affairs with Michigan University Press, 2007. And more recently, a book on the language of corruption and Israelis' moral climate.
Culture. Moral culture.
Moral culture, which came out in 2010 and has occasioned a debate which is still ongoing in Israel. And maybe we'll learn a little bit about that today. Yossi's current book is on the politics of archaeology in Israel. It's in development. Another controversial topic, as you can see. Yossi doesn't shy away from those. I'd like to highlight as well his contribution here at Georgetown as an institution builder. Yossi was the founding director of our program for Jewish civilization, which still thrives here on campus. We've agreed that he'll speak for maybe 35, 40 minutes. That'll give us time for more informal conversation. There's a lot to talk about, so please join me in welcoming Yossi Shane.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom, and it's really great to be here. It's remarkable